Dexter Resurrection gave us one of the most fascinating storylines in the entire Dexter franchise. Leon Prater's group of serial killers. So far, we've only met 6 of them, but 2 others have been mentioned, and there have probably been many more over the years. Which for me raises a big question. Did any of the old Dexter killers ever attend these gatherings? And that's exactly what we're gonna explore in this video. I've narrowed it down to 5 killers from the previous Dexter series, who in my opinion are the only ones that realistically fit the profile of a Prater group member. And I will rank them from least to most likely using clues from Resurrection as well as the 3 other shows. And in case you're wondering why I picked just these specific 5 guys, I excluded killers who weren't actually serial killers who were active in a very short time frame, serial killers with fewer than 6 victims, as well as those who don't really fit the classic serial killer archetype, such as gang members, hitmen, and traffickers. So let's start off with the least likely candidate to have been a part of Prater's gatherings, Brian Moser. On paper, Brian looks perfect. He racked up at least 20 kills over a span of about 13 years, a dream resume for Leon Prater. But here's the problem. If we exclude his time as the Ice Truck Killer, since that was during Dexter Season 1, and we know for a fact that he wasn't in the group then, his confirmed kills drops to just 4, and that's probably not enough to impress Prater. And when Prater talks to Dexter about Brian, he only refers to him as the Ice Truck Killer. If they had crossed paths earlier, surely Prater would have mentioned his days as the NHI Killer too. And add to the fact that the gatherings would have had to exist for at least 17 years for Brian to even qualify. Mia LaPierre had been a part of the group for 4 years, and she said that the group had been around for a few years before that. So I would estimate the group to be between 6 and 9 years old, so 17 years old is a stretch and a half. And finally, Prater himself says that if the Ice Truck Killer perhaps had someone to talk to, maybe he wouldn't have taken his own life. That line alone basically kills this theory, unless Prater was lying, which feels like even a bigger stretch. So yeah, Brian's chances here are pretty much 0. At number 4 we have Walter Kenny, the infamous Tooth Fairy from Season 6. Despite only appearing in a single episode, Walter is one of the deadliest killers Dexter ever faced, with at least 16 victims over nearly 3 decades. He beat and strangled prostitutes to death before removing their lateral incisors, which he then collected as trophies. He sounds like a perfect fit for Leon Prater's group. But his unbearable attitude, which earned him the nickname World's Oldest Asshole by Dexter, doesn't fully rhyme with the friendly nature Leon seems to strive after for his gatherings. I can only imagine just how unwilling and grumpy Kenny would be if he ever was forced to do a show and tell.
Mr. Prater says it's time for your share.
Don't just stand there. I need to sit down. What's a young guy like you doing around Coral Island? Or do you get off hanging out with corpses?
Given the circumstances, I think it would be a nice tribute to hear from you as well.
You're gonna tell me how you figured out who I am.
I know most of my guests are here only for the money.
And a 6-pack of beer from the liquor store and the latest teen-ass nipple parade and spanked.
However, this along with the fact that Prater doesn't have any visible Tooth Fairy trophies could just be a good explanation to why he never got invited back. But the timeline is where things really start to get tricky. 15 of Walter's 16 kills happened in the 80s. For him to have been a part of the gatherings back then, Prater's group would have needed to exist for nearly 40 years, which is almost certainly not the case. The only other possibility is that Prater somehow tracked Walter down decades after his killing spree. That would mean that the group only would have needed to exist for about 10 years, which would be reasonable, but realistically that doesn't really hold up. In Season 6, Dexter believed that the Tooth Fairy was long dead, and he only found out about him and were able to track him down after Walter committed a fresh murder in 2011. So without a new lead, how would Leon Prater and Charlie have been able to find him? Short answer, they wouldn't. Coming in at number 3 we have Daniel Vogel, better known as Oliver Saxon, aka the Brain Surgeon. Now, this silly fella had been killing practically his entire life, As a small child, he murdered his own brother. At 17, he set a fire that killed 7 more kids. And as an adult, he stacked up at least 16 additional victims before Dexter finally put a stop to it in 2013. On paper, he checks all the boxes. Highly prolific, active for decades, and Prater's gatherings would only need to have existed for about 10 years for him to qualify. So far, so good. But here's the catch. Oliver was only ever known as the brain surgeon during season 8. Before that, he had no known alias and wasn't a recognized serial killer, which means that Prater would have had no way of even knowing this guy existed unless he had some very deep insider knowledge. Maybe Dr. Evelyn Vogel's fame in the psychopath world could have sparked Prater's interest, and maybe from there he somehow dug up Daniel's violent past, the murdered brother, and with that information somehow figure out that he faked his death and took on the false identity of Oliver Saxon. But as you can hear, this sounds pretty ridiculous. Even though Leon's money and resources seems to have no end, it feels like a massive long shot. And Saxon's behavior in the show really is the nail in the coffin. He was desperate for his mother to help him find a way to live in society while still feeding his dark passenger, just like she once did with Dexter. If he had already been attending Prater's gatherings at some point, surrounded by like-minded killers, you'd think that he would have gotten that advice from them in the past, so he wouldn't be so desperate for his mother's help. And of course, Prater doesn't have any visible trophies known to be connected to Saxon either. So while Oliver Saxon ranks above Brian Moser and Walter Kenny, his chances of actually having attended Leon Prater's gatherings are still extremely slim. And in second place we have none other than Arthur Mitchell, aka the Trinity Killer. And this is where things really start to get interesting, because unlike the others, Trinity actually has some serious chances of being tied to Prater's gatherings. Trinity is by far the deadliest killer Dexter ever faced. Between 1979 and 2009, he claimed at least 279 victims. And even though the murders weren't officially recognized as a serial killer case until season 4, Prater might have heard about him much earlier through his FBI contacts. Special Agent Lundy had the Trinity Killer theory for quite some time before season 4, but no one in the bureau believed him. But if one of Prater's contacts caught wind of Lundy's theory, Charlie could have easily tracked Arthur down, especially if she had access to Lundy's notes. The catch though is that Leon's gatherings would have had to exist for at least 13 years, which is not impossible, but not super likely either. But here comes the big clue. In Dexter Resurrection episode 4, we see that Leon Prater has one of Trinity's hammers in his trophy collection, and when the hammer is shown, we get a flashback to Dexter killing Trinity. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but that hammer was in Dexter's possession and would most likely have ended up at the bottom of the ocean along with Trinity at the end of season 4, which means that the hammer in Prater's possession is not the same one. It makes sense that Trinity would have used different hammers over the years, and it seems like he would just hand them out at different building sites like he does in the show. And that means that the tool couldn't have ended up in police evidence, because the Trinity Killer wasn't a case by then. So if he didn't retrieve the hammer from evidence, how did Leon Prater get his hand on the hammer? Well, to me, this opens up the door to the possibility of Arthur Mitchell actually having attended the gatherings at least one time, and that would be the time where he potentially gave up a hammer to the trophy collection. But on the flip side, Arthur's behavior with Dexter raises some questions. When Dexter, disguised as Kyle Butler, admits to killing someone, Arthur reacts with this kind of manic joy and relief, and he really seems thrilled to finally share his trauma with someone, almost like it's the first time he's ever been able to talk about it. Would he have acted like that if he had already had an outlet in Prater's group? Probably not, but maybe. And now to number 1. The killer I think is the most likely to have attended Leon Prater's gatherings, and that is Kurt Caldwell. Over the span of 25 years, Kurt claimed the lives of at least 32 victims, and this is the only one where the timeline isn't a potential issue, because the gatherings would only need to have existed for a couple of years before New Blood, and we know for a fact that they have existed for longer than that. One thing that does complicate things, however, much like Daniel Vogel and Arthur Mitchell, is that Kurt's murders were never officially recognized as a serial killer case until the very end of New Blood. So how do you find the serial killer when nobody even knows one exists? Well, in this case, it could be explained away by just how geographically close Kurt's town of Iron Lake and Prater's New York City are. If Leon heard whispers of young women disappearing from the small, close-by town over and over again, that could easily have triggered his radar. And after that, Charlie wouldn't have that hard of a time linking the missing girls to Kurt, and of course leaving him an invitation. Now, Prater's trophy room's absence of a visible Kurt trophy could at first be an argument for why Kurt hasn't attended the gatherings. But if we think about it, the kind of trophies Kurt collects, which are the entire bodies of his victims, it makes sense why Prater doesn't have one. It's not exactly something you just shove in a suitcase to bring along. But on the other hand, Leon still seems like the kind of guy who would die to add a body like that to his collection. Maybe Kurt attended once, refused to part with the body, and that's the reason why he was never invited back. And now, brace yourself for the most out there argument for why Kurt has met Prater's serial killer group. Now, this is extremely vague, but hear me out. It's the last thing Kurt ever says before he is stabbed to death by Dexter.
Wait, what? That's your rationale for killing people? Some kind of bullshit justice code?
To me, that line has always sounded a bit off. Like, why would you react that strongly after finding out Dexter's reason for killing people? He seems unreasonably shocked by Dexter's reason, and cool as a cucumber with finding out that Dexter is a serial killer. Almost like he's used to meet other killers and hearing their excuses for why they do the things they do, and that Dexter's excuse really stands out. Maybe if Dexter hadn't shut him up with the gloves at that moment, Kurt would have continued his tantrum and spilled the beans about a secret serial killer group in New York City. Who knows? So there you have it, that's my ranking of which old Dexter killers could have realistically attended Leon Prater's gatherings. And I quickly want to add that even though I put Kurt Caldwell at the top of the list, I don't actually think that he would want to be a part of this group. He would probably just attend one time if he got invited, and then after that I think he would have found the other serial killers kind of repulsive. I mean, when he is lying on the kill table, it becomes obvious that he is very delusional. He really thinks that he is helping these women that he kills. Yeah, and I think that he would just not get along with the other group members, or even with Prater. He would just find it weird. I think he's kind of a loner, this guy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Would you rank them differently, or maybe I perhaps missed someone that you think would qualify? Please let me know, and I see you